I do begin by acknowledging and offering my condolence to the family, friends and community members of Mr Paech, who was taken from his community. I offer that condolence and acknowledge Samara Laverty, who is with us here today. And I also acknowledge the 8 Aboriginal women who have been brutally murdered in the Northern Territory this year alone. Madam Speaker, this issue remains one of the most pressing challenges we face. The issue of crime and antisocial behaviour in our communities across the Northern Territory. We are all impacted, we are all affected in every single community across the Northern Territory. I have seen firsthand the complexities of the issues and the need for bold, innovative solutions that go beyond the traditional approaches of the past. Madam Speaker, I want to acknowledge that during our time in government, we did work to implement measures to address both immediate concerns and the underlying causes of crime. We did introduce a range of initiatives, including enhanced monitoring provisions, strengthened laws around domestic and family violence to protect victims, and programs within the prison system designed at addressing offending behaviours, which were to be co-designed with the sectors. We did law and justice groups, Madam Speaker. Important to establish the law and justice groups to elevate Aboriginal leaders and elders to work with the judiciary on appropriate sentencing options for members of our community. We invested in expanding prison capacity, not as a standalone solution, as an acknowledgement that prisons are one piece of the puzzle. Prisons provide necessary space for accountability and public safety. But, Madam Speaker, let me be clear. Incarceration alone, incarceration in itself, will never solve the challenges we face. People do not stay in prison forever. If we are not addressing the root causes of the offending and criminogenic behaviour, we are not offering pathways to rehabilitation and reintegration. We are simply denying the problem and denying solving it. There will continue to be victims of crime, Madam Speaker. There will continue to be challenges to the safety if we look at prison as the only solution. It will not solve crime completely. It will not address the root causes of crime. If incarceration was the answer, the Northern Territory would already have some of the lowest crime rates in the nation. To break the cycle of reoffending, we need robust programs and alternatives to custody. We need initiatives that help people build and rebuild their lives, reduce recidivism, and ultimately create safer communities. This is why, Madam Speaker, we have to work to continue to establish and fund and extend behavioural change programs and post-relief support initiatives. These measures are designed to ensure that when individuals return to society, they are better equipped to contribute positively rather than returning to the behaviours that led to their incarceration. I'm not for a second, Madam Speaker, suggesting that one single person or party has the answers, nor am I suggesting that one person or one party is solely responsible for the issues we face. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, everyone here is responsible as legislators, regardless of our party alliance or our positions in or out of government. We are all responsible and all have a role to do better. What is clear, again, regardless of political alliance, is that numerous attempts from all governments, all oppositions, to call out for different programs and reforms and approaches is not seeing the results that we had all hoped for. This should not be seen, Madam Speaker, as a complete failure. We need to understand why. Why are resources not having the impact that we want them to? Do we have the right mix? Are we looking outside the box? Are we innovating and stepping up to meet the challenges our community are facing? I think the answer is we can all do better and we all have to do much better, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to acknowledge the government has incarcerated an additional 600 people since August last year. And here we are, 8 months later, with crime stats still increasing. Many Territorians are saying crime is worse than ever before. The proposed amendments before us today, Madam Speaker, attempt to apply a level of weighting against granting bail once all of the other criteria has been met or considered. Whilst this does bring an additional measure, it does not stop the individual from being granted bail. It simply adds an additional consideration that the courts must have confidence in granting bail. The measures in this change are measures that should already be being considered by the judiciary. This change that is also being proposed to the Youth Justice Act 2005, where it is proposed that the general principle that a youth be kept in custody for an offence as a last resort be removed, is one that I'd like to speak further on. We've seen the introduction to this in similar areas. In the New South Wales jurisdiction, Madam Speaker, this change saw a 32% increase in young people being held in youth detention. What we do know is that a young person is held in a youth detention facility, the earlier that person's lifelong connection and journey with the criminal justice system starts. It's where they learn from other people. It's where they become institutionalised. It's where they become better criminals. Again, Madam Speaker, I want to make it clear that we agree that there absolutely must be consequences for all, but we must not ignore the data and the evidence that tells us we need to be doing more when it comes to diversion and steering young people away from the criminal justice system. The government needs to be clear about the additional resources that this will require, Madam Speaker. Resources such as additional beds, training, services, additional correctional staff, Madam Speaker, and importantly, additional programs to help young people be diverted. We've heard the harrowing tales of staff from Danila Dilba talking about the conditions that people are subjected to, how their anger continues to grow in the youth detention centres because of the lack of programs. In the previous government, Madam Speaker, we did try to address community safety concerns. We tried to reduce crime. We took important steps to empower law enforcement, strengthen legal protections and provide targeted interventions. We introduced legislation that allowed police to impose curfews during public disorder. We enhanced their powers to effectively allow wanding to be carried out in our community, which I acknowledge the Northern Territory's Chief Minister has expanded those powers. We've seen, Madam Speaker, a whole range of reforms of all governments over the last 3 decades. To support businesses and the broader community, certainly we listened and we passed trespassing laws that provided greater certainty for issuing trespass orders and implemented a presumption against bail for all serious violent offences involving a prohibited and a controlled weapon. I acknowledge the Chief Minister, when the new government were brought in October, made a suite of changes and built on to those provisions. We delivered a $570 million investment in police force, ensuring that there were more officers on the ground and additional patrol vehicles were able to be deployed to enhance community safety. We focused on trying to break the cycle of reoffending, Madam Speaker, by introducing enforced corrections orders and mandatory behavioural change programs. Additionally, we established bail support accommodation to ensure compliance with bail conditions and reduce the likelihood of reoffending. Madam Speaker, we then had the new CLP government come to power and introduce a series of legislative measures in an attempt to curb the crime waves. And after all that we have been promised and introduced, we continue to see crime in our communities, continue to experience unacceptable levels of crime. The crime rates have continued to grow. Territorians continue to be victims, injured, and we are seeing, tragically, loss of life. We must all stop now and look forward together. Together, we must meet in the middle and find common ground. I acknowledge that that will be a challenge for some of us, but we owe it to our communities to all do better and to come together and to look forward together. It's clear we need to embrace new ideas on both sides and work collaboratively to build a better system. Madam Speaker, one of the most promising opportunities is the development of an alternative first responder model. This model would deploy teams of professionals, mental health experts, social workers, crisis intervention specialists and community language speakers who are all trained to address situations as mental health crisis, family disputes, community tensions and public disorder. By responding to these scenarios with care and expertise, we can de-escalate crises, provide meaningful support and reduce the burden on our police force, allowing them to focus on enforcement and public safety. At the same time, Madam Speaker, this would allow those relationships to be built. We look across at other jurisdictions in Norway, New Mexico and America, and New Zealand, all adopting this alternative first responder model. At the same time, we must rebuild and strengthen the presence of police in remote communities. Community safety affects everyone. This is vital for monitoring, enforcement and fostering a sense of safety for all residents. There are important investments that are needed, and I want to acknowledge work that has been done at a federal level across both parties over a number of years, and that has been in the Northern Territory Remote Aboriginal Investment. The recent Northern Territory NT-RAY funding, which was signed by the Northern Territory Senator Mullindiri McCarthy, the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, and the Northern Territory's Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, which now comes into effect in July, is an opportunity to look at innovative ways of increasing safety in the bush, which in turn flows into safety in our towns. This package delivers increased funding for the Aboriginal interpreter services and funds for community development, mediating and peacekeeping, measures that myself and the member for Mulka have long advocated for. These are measures, Madam Speaker, that will actually work because we are seeing them now across the bush. They've been delivered for years in our communities. The Southern Tanami Kudjati Group, the Kudjati Group in Lajamanu, the Groote Island Youth Diversion Programs, the Elders Programs in Yerrakala. These are all tangible examples, Madam Speaker. Building trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve is crucial to creating a cohesive and safe environment. To achieve goals, we need collaboration across all levels of government, between political parties and, most importantly, the communities themselves. Cities, towns and communities and homelands all deserve to be safe and free from these issues. Together, we must prioritise early intervention, prevention and innovation over the repetition of strategies that have failed to deliver long-term results. The safety and well-being of our communities should be our highest priority. By investing in solutions that address the root causes of crime, by empowering communities with the resources they need, by reimagining how we respond and how we deal with crises, we can build a safer and more fairer community for all. Madam Speaker, I understand the feelings of frustration and even, to an extent, some of the fear in our community that they are experiencing right now. And it's not okay. Madam Speaker, I've been physically assaulted myself, punched in the face multiple times a few weeks ago while trying to help de-escalate a conflict in my hometown of Alice Springs. Friends and family have been broken into, had belongings and vehicles stolen. We are all sick of it. I've seen firsthand the harrowing accounts of people who have been subjected to horrible events and incidences. And I've seen the countless people also sitting in watch houses and jail cells waiting to be released with little to no programs offered or support to turn their lives around. Madam Speaker, this is something we all must do better. We've gotten to where we have because of what we've been doing, and it's safe to say that where we are is not good. But we can't expect things to change if we aren't going to do things differently. Of course, people should be incarcerated if they do the wrong thing, if they cause harm and are a threat to the community. No one is denying that. There must absolutely be consequences for bad behaviour. But we must also be realistic, Madam Speaker. We cannot lock people up and throw away the key. And we cannot expect people to change if we just keep putting them in a facility that they are out of sight and out of mind, and then expect them to emerge as model citizens. We've heard today that it costs anywhere from $300 to $350 a day to have someone in prison. Let's say on the current population of $2,600 to $2,800, we are spending around $1 million a day. That's a huge expense, and we're certainly not any safer for it. We are, Madam Speaker, not any safer for it. The Corrections Minister and the Treasurer have acknowledged that jailing is failing, yet the only solution we hear from the Corrections Minister is to lock people up, knowing that he is failing Territorians. We need to look at how we can better spend money on initiatives that will reduce this level of horrendous crime and antisocial behaviour. Making tweaks to legislation and ordering people to consider things they should already be considering is not the best answer. I acknowledge it is an immediate answer that will deliver, hopefully, immediate results. And I acknowledge the work being done by the Chief Minister and her government. I speak about the root causes of crime and antisocial all the time, Madam Speaker, and I'm going to do it again today. We need to address them to stop crime from happening. We need to stop crime before it starts. If people are stealing, why are they stealing? For what purpose? If people are out on the streets, why are they out on the streets? Why is it not safe at home? Indeed, do they have a home? If people are resorting to violence, why are they? If people are hurting others, we must work to understand why are they doing this. If we want to fix the problems, we need to understand the drivers, the causes, the issues before we can bring solutions and measures. We need immediate solutions, Madam Speaker. I absolutely acknowledge that. And we do need immediate action. And we are all here today, standing here, willing to work with the government to provide those immediate solutions. But we mustn't also forget that in order to change this trajectory that we are seeing and experiencing right here today in our communities, we must invest in our future. We must invest in putting in the appropriate support services and education to help our children. Our children are our future. Our children are the generations that we can absolutely work with now to ensure that their journey and their pathway is one that leads them to a happy and fulfilling life, and not a life into a deeply embedded relationship with the criminal justice system. We absolutely need to do the work with whoever the Commonwealth Government is after this weekend to ensure that everyone is on the same page and that we can invest in the appropriate support services. It is a reality, Madam Speaker, that so many young men and women in our communities have never been on any form of social welfare or social support, thus further pressurising their relatives, putting pressure on the relatives and the families, contributing to a lifetime of crime. When we improve economic and social conditions for the most marginalised and disadvantaged people, I believe we will then truly begin to see a reduction in crime and antisocial behaviour. There are so many in our community would have you believe that this is an Aboriginal-only issue. I do not agree with that sentiment. I believe that this is driven as a class issue, and us and them, are haves and have-nots. It is not a town or a bush issue. It is not town against bush. It is not black against white. It is an issue about class. When we look at crime and the crime that is being committed and who is committing the crime, we need to understand, Madam Speaker, that it is being committed and antisocial behaviour is being driven largely proportionately by people living well below the poverty line and people living in disenfranchised communities across the Northern Territory. We need to look at how we can respond to this situation in a responsive manner which improves everyone's economic and social conditions, creating empowerment, creating voice, creating jobs, creating opportunity, creating a community free from crime and antisocial behaviour. We do not need the drawn-out processes to tell us what we need and what we already know. People commit a crime for a variety of reasons. Some say poverty, some say boredom, some say because they're dared to do it, some say loss of purpose, some say anger and resentment. These are all matters that we absolutely can work to address. Also, Madam Speaker, we must not be afraid to stand firm in a number of key investments, like fully funding Territory schools, Kids attending school are less likely to be caught up in crime and antisocial behaviour. Kids that have access to early education and care are far more likely to be ready for school and to succeed. Families that need intensive support services and access to safe, secure and affordable housing are less likely to be caught up in crime and antisocial behaviour. Our community members that have access to meaningful employment are less likely to be caught up in a world of crime and antisocial behaviour. And I want to acknowledge, Madam Speaker, the work that is being done in this space. I want to acknowledge the Commonwealth Government's investment, 3,000 jobs in the Northern Territory. I want to also acknowledge the work being done by the Northern Territory Correctional Services Unit, looking at the establishment of community work camps, not in our towns, not in our rural areas, but in our remote regions of the Northern Territory. I absolutely, Madam Speaker, stand here willing to work with Minister Maley to look at the establishment of work camps across the bush. Work camps that can absolutely have people out there working in the local communities, showing their local communities that they are contributing to their local community, helping their local communities, Madam Speaker. I want to acknowledge as well before any member in this Parliament's time, many positions existed in the bush before the Northern Territory emergency response. We had probation and parole, community corrections positions in the bush, Madam Speaker, and I absolutely stand here willing and absolutely will support the Northern Territory Chief Minister on any measure that delivers economic opportunity in the bush, particularly around community probation and parole. I think it is absolutely important. I know that these matters are before the court, and I will be very careful in my remarks, but when we look at people who are out in the community and we look at the seriousness of the offence, and people have been saying that person should have been out in their community, the community that doesn't have the resources to support the intense work that young people or old people may need. When we look at our remote communities, we look at communities and I see strong places of love, law, culture, language, of happiness of people, but I also see that there needs to be more resources in how we better respond to people with complex needs and challenges. And I acknowledge that there's an opportunity to do that through the NT-RAY. I acknowledge through the $250 million that was delivered to Central Australia, there was money there for screening around young people very early on who might have a disorder, maybe FASD, might be a learning difficulty, so that we can screen them earlier and put in the appropriate support services so that they don't spiral and then end up in the criminal justice system. If we can identify what those disorders are, whether it's FASD, whether it's ADHD or any one of those like disorders, we can put in the appropriate services and we can try and curve their trajectory away from the criminal justice system. So I acknowledge that that money has been put there for Central Australia. I, of course, will support any call of the Chief Minister to advocate for that money to be increased and delivered right across the Territory, because I think if we can get in much earlier and understand any complex learning difficulties or understanding of cognitive disorders, then we can put in those services as another way of trying to prevent this escalating growth of crime and antisocial behaviour in our community. Because, Madam Speaker, none of these issues are too big to deal with. They may feel like it, but they are all preventable. And I'm saying right here, right now, that these measures are absolute examples of how we can all work together to overcome those challenges. There are ideas that have come from communities themselves. And, Madam Speaker, that is where we will see solutions. Communities themselves hold many of the solutions. We just need to listen and act and not shy away from change. We need, Madam Speaker, our non-Indigenous organisations, our social services, our Indigenous organisations, our community groups and our governments of all levels, local, territory and federal, to put aside all historical differences and come together, share ideas, share solutions and share the work and share in the success. Let's be bold, Madam Speaker, and build a system that genuinely delivers reform for the people of the Northern Territory. And I think it's important, Madam Speaker, we have heard over recent days, weeks and months, lots of comments about appropriate sentencing options and making sure that there's a level of relevance. And I think a really tangible solution for this is working with the judiciary to bring, the judiciary holds an annual conference or bi-yearly conference and brings in all of the members of the judiciary, our hard-working Northern Territory Police, our legal community, our social services organisations, all get around the table and share lived examples, lived experiences of where they believe that there have been issues that can be addressed. And I think, you know, certainly that would be something that the Northern Territory's Attorney General could attend, to hear where there are bottlenecks or where there are challenges or where there is the need for legislative reform. I think would be a really example way of working with it and showing the community that, yes, if you're saying and you believe that there are issues, let's bring everyone around the table to have those important conversations and to understand where there might be challenges or where there might be differences, I think is incredibly important. I think, Madam Speaker, we've spoken many, many times in the Parliament about justice reinvestment initiatives. And I think certainly after the weekend, after the federal election, when the dust settles and whoever is in government, hopefully it is a federal Labor government, but regardless of that, I think that enables us to hit the reset button as a territory, work with whoever the new or incoming government is, and look at ways that we can work to change some of those issues. I know that, Madam Speaker, when I was the Deputy Chief Minister in the last term, towards the end of our term of government, and Chief Minister Lawler, we did meet with the Commonwealth to talk about some options. And I think the Chief Minister, Finocchiaro, has also spoken about the need to consider and build on those elements. And I think we need to understand when people are being paid through social welfare, it often goes into people's bank accounts at midnight, and there's not a supermarket open at midnight. There's not a place to buy Kimbies or milk unless you go to the 24-hour store. But we need to see about, can we have that change to 7 a.m. when the shops are open, and encourage people to access those goods and services, Madam Speaker. We talk about, again, alcohol, and we're seeing now that people are still accessing alcohol. I think running those positive campaigns around dobbing a dealer around black market is certainly something that we can all do. But I also acknowledge we've had campaigns in the past in the Northern Territory learning to live with alcohol as well. I think, again, there are multiple pieces to the puzzle, and today I think we are putting a piece into that, but we need to work together to find the rest of the pieces to reform the Northern Territory's justice system, to address crime and antisocial behaviour in our communities, and to certainly see that investment into the social determinants. Because, Madam Speaker, being out on the street, talking to, whether it's young people, talking to community members, I know that lots of urban members here are regularly out on the doors talking to families and friends. I think one thing that we do here, and Madam Speaker, I'm just about to hit under a minute, so I'm going to ask for an extension of time.
Is an extension granted? Time and extensions granted.
I think it doesn't matter what party you're in, door knocking, you get a sense of what's going on, how the community are feeling, talking about, I think people are saying, look, we just want you all to work together. I'm really happy. I've taken that absolutely on board. I'm absolutely going to support the Chief Minister today and in this bill. I do, of course, like many others, have some reservation around the changes to the Youth Justice Act. But again, I think between now and the Minister for Youth Justice bringing in the legislation, I think it was flagged in June, around those changes, we'll have a bit of a sense of any fluctuation of remand numbers for youth that we can work with and we can understand, because I think that is important. Certainly, any program, people call them boot camps, rehabilitation camps, country camps. They're good, they work. I would just, one of the things that I was doing was working with the local community in Yuendamu, again, another really amazing community. They ran a really successful program there many, many years ago, the Mount Theo project, aimed at sniffing, but it was done out on a homeland not too far from Yuendamu. Working with the Brown family, certainly did some really important work. And I think if we look at those solutions, we can see that that did have positive impact in our local community. The alternative to custody facility for women in Alice Springs has been an amazing facility. It is going through the process, was under our term. I absolutely acknowledge that's happening still under this government, was the expansion of the site to further grow its capacity to deliver therapeutic programming and responses for women. We've got the program on Groot Island, again, which is rolling out. But I think there's some work that we can do around looking at the targeted areas across the territory of where violent crime is happening and where can we stand those up. I think the alternative first responder model is good because I think, can we develop something like the TRG, but in a different lens, a lens that we can absolutely come in, develop important plans and strategies to respond to particular communities or areas in our community that we can do the work. I absolutely want to be really clear. People who make the assumption or suggestion that Aboriginal people are not worried or concerned or live and experience crime and antisocial behaviour every day is incorrect. There are so many people. I work with leaders every day from my local communities. They might not be in the media, they might not be on Facebook posts, but they are working every day to try and bring harmony, mediation and peacekeeping to their local communities. And I think that our role as Parliament, certainly support any budget appropriation that's given to bringing in a dedicated budget line or program around return to country, but the support services for elders to do that work, I think is important. So many Aboriginal elders and leaders are doing that work, but they are restricted. Many of them don't have a vehicle to be able to get to town, to talk to community members, to help bring them home. Many of them don't have those resources. So anything that we can do on a territory level, anything that we can do on a federal level to work together to help the Aboriginal leadership further have the resources to expand what they are already doing is incredibly important, and I would absolutely support that in all stages to do that. I think the Minister for Corrections has spoken about it previously. I was the Corrections Minister for a period of time as well. The Visiting Elders program in our correctional centres is really important, talking about strengthening people when they get out. I think that's all work that we can absolutely do together that will absolutely begin to see a shift in our communities. I think, Madam Speaker, that one thing that's really important, and I'm not going to try and please no one think that I'm verbaling them. I think one thing that I found really useful is jumping in, if you're in Darwin with a Larrakia patrol, or jumping in with Tangentyere, or if you're in a remote region, jump in with a remote community and do their patrols, because you get to live and see firsthand many of the experiences that they come into. And one thing I think that we shouldn't be afraid of is being bold and innovative. The Northern Territory is actually the jurisdiction who established night patrols, world leading. We were the first. The Northern Territory was the first jurisdiction in the world to introduce night patrols. So we've demonstrated that we have the ability and the capacity and the capability. to be innovative and provide solutions. So let's work together to do that. I think that's really important. When you're travelling around, whether it's with the driver in the patrol or the patrollers or the youth workers, you get to hear from them some really easy, tangible things that we can do and we can improve. So I think, that is another example of how we can all do it and work together. I do also want to acknowledge, like many others have here today, the community in all of the responses where there have been heinous and horrendous acts of violence against people and where there's been loss of life. And I do want to acknowledge the Northern Territory Police, Fire and Emergency Services for the incredible work that they all do. Police absolutely do an incredible job. Our paramedics often having to respond to horrific sites and instances of violence, so acknowledging them is incredibly important as well. So look, Madam Speaker, I am appreciative for the opportunity to speak to this. As I said earlier, I am not here by any means, way, shape or form blaming any individual, blaming any government, blaming any political party. I think by admission over historical decades, I think we've all tried to do things. I think there are things the last previous CLP government looked at where there were some measures in there that were absolutely worthwhile, but there were some that were not. But I think that today is a sign of true bipartisanship, and I think that's what our community have been calling for. And I think again, I just want to make the point I made some time ago. I'm not ever going to, particularly from here on, I don't want to be attacking the government when it comes to the statistics on domestic and family violence, because as we've heard from the sector, those statistics are going to continue to rise as people feel more comfortable to come forward and disclose the level of violence, if there is violence or if there has been an incident. But I think we can certainly all work to do better. I think this is important legislation. I do thank the Chief Minister for bringing Parliament back to pass this. I think that we've drawn a line in the sand today, and I'm hoping that we can continue to walk forward together for the interest of the Territory. There will be some times where we'll be going off in different directions, but I think if we all maintain the strong relationships with one another, if we all maintain the common goal is for the benefit and betterment of the Northern Territory, then I think we can see some transformative reform. Thank you, Madam Speaker.